Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, the Joan Gans Cooney and Peter G. Peterson Fund, the Malkin Fund, the May and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America. I'm Richard Heffner, your host on The Open Mind, and I had the very comforting pleasure the other day of looking back at a program I did half a decade ago with a quite wonderful medical doctor. Indeed, he was such a terrific guest, and his observations about doctors and patients were so wise, as well as provocative, that I've asked him back again to say more about the art and science of practicing medicine. Dr. Richard P. Cohen is clinical professor of medicine at Cornell Medical School and attending physician at the New York Presbyterian Hospital. Wonderfully well-trained, Dr. Cohen is truly a physician's physician, as well as, happily, my own. As I noted last time, it has almost always been my own good fortune over the years to have enjoyed expert medical care at the hands of fine and thoughtful physicians, men and women alike, who have combined great technical learning and skills with a humane and comforting approach to their patients. My own luck in that regard seems to be holding out. And Dr. Cohen and I first talked a bit last time about what my guest deplored as truth dumping, just dumping bad news on a patient without much regard for time or place or feelings. He said, truth-telling in certain senses can really be mean and counter-therapeutic. There's no upside to being mean to people. There's just not. It doesn't serve any purpose. Now, I know that a lot of medical people, physicians and medical students alike, saw our first program together. And so today I want first to ask Dr. Cohen what reaction he got to this rather baldly expressed point of view, and to others too, those having to do with the availability of medical information, or misinformation, on the internet, having to do with the growing presence of women in medicine, with the economics of medical care, and so on. And first, Dr. Cohen, I want to point out to you this wonderful cartoon in the New Yorker this past week. The doctor coming to a patient and saying with a box of pizza in his hand, "We find that pizza softens the blow of bad news." And I couldn't help but think that's Cohen himself.
Well, we'll try to use humor instead of pizza, but no, I think that I think people wonder, everyone wonders about how they're going to handle bad news. And there are a few people in life who are in the position of giving people bad news. Physicians are clearly one of them. We often give people the worst news that they ever get. Each of us today may get bad news from people who might be helping us manage our pensions, but it doesn't necessarily have the same implications as the kind of bad news that, for example, I gave someone Friday afternoon that they had a lung cancer. And that's a really big deal for that patient. It's not going to go away.
Does that give you a bad day in the office?
That's a good question. I think when you have a difficult one of those encounters coming up, and I know what my schedule is, in the morning or even the night before, one rehearses their speech in their head. I think you have a bad day if it doesn't go well. As we discussed last time, I think those interactions, the physician has to realize that he's got all the cards or she's got all the cards, and you got to play it right. And if you don't play it right, then it makes for a bad day. But if you play it right, you say to yourself, you know what, this is a yucky situation, but the fact that I did it the way I did it and it went as well as it went it was as easy for that patient and as painless or less painful than it might have otherwise been had I not done it so well.
Did you get reactions to the points you made from your own professionals, fellow professionals?
Yes, I got a lot of the material that we discussed was actually work that had been done by Joe Finns, who's the director of medical ethics at New York Hospital, and I think he was pleased that I carried his banner with you. And I've used the tape a number of times in my teaching of the ethics course, as a precept in the ethics course at Cornell. And what's interesting about when I show the tape is I look at the students and they look at me as if to say, and I will, it's intriguing, of course. Why would anyone not do it the other way? And I think as the medical students have matured and as medical ethics has matured, the notion that the patient always has the complete right to know, has faded from the very basis of medical ethics as we discussed last time.
Of course, it always was the opposite.
Well,
I mean, what we've done is come from a time when the thinking was that the doctor knows best and he'll let the patient know to an extreme that left many of us in the dark.
Right. And now I think the balance is returned, or is returning, or at least there are those of us who'd like to think that it's not so simple to just tell young physicians the way to handle patients is just to tell them everything. Just give them a copy of their chart, give them, let them, tell them the whole thing, give them all the statistics. That you got to take time and you got to talk to people, and there's a humanistic aspect of this, and I think we're succeeding with that.
Well, when you talk about teaching young to-be physicians or young physicians who are going on to practice as you do, what difference do you find now? I've asked you this question many times on this program, but in your office too. What's the difference between now and then?
Arnold Relman used the term with you, which I'm not afraid to use, the feminization of the profession. It's mostly women, and it's very mostly women in internal medicine and other primary care specialties. And Dr. Relman said it, so I'm not embarrassed to say it, as someone as distinguishes him as opposed to a local doc like myself, that they have a little different worldview than the rough and tumble men who always handled this profession.
And how is that impacting upon the practice of medicine?
I think it's in a number of ways. I think women are less autocratic than men. I think as one in terms of the interaction, and then of course there's the whole other aspect that women are, that the feminization, and it's the men behave the same as the women, but the notion that when you're a physician that you have no life other than this, which is the way we were raised, that's gone. That's gone. And these people want to have a life. When they hear about what I do and the way I lived, they want no part of that.
So what do you mean, the way you lived?
Well, I'm not embarrassed to say that I don't really have much of a life outside of medicine. I don't have a lot of hobbies, and I don't have a lot of free time. And when my kids were growing up, I never got to school concerts, and I didn't take an after. If my son was playing softball, I didn't go to games. I couldn't be a coach. I'm not complaining, but the nature, if you want to do the kind of medicine that I did, it required a tremendous personal sacrifice for other interests.
Well, now wait a minute. You say the kind of medicine practiced the way you did. My point about you, when I talk to my friends, is that, good God, he called me on Saturday, and he called me on Sunday. I didn't call him. He called me to find out how I was, given the condition I was in the previous week. Now, you're still doing that.
Well, I haven't changed. I haven't changed at all. I am not doing anything any differently now than I did 25 years ago.
All right, but will your students?
I'm not sure they're willing to... No, I don't think so. There are people, but I don't think the profession wants people, I don't think the profession is nurturing people, personal opinion, right, nurturing people to behave the way I do. The role models are different.
For good or for bad?
It's for different. It's a perfect storm, because what's happened again, I don't study this, but I've just been doing this 24 hours a day for more than 25 years, is that we've got people who are working for third parties. They're not really controlling what's going on in the business aspect or the way they're practicing. And so their vest in it is not what it was with me. And so therefore their commitment to it may not, it's not going to be at the same level. So it's tough to say, but probably real.
Now, I thought that the feminization of medicine was not a matter of the time, but also of attitude, and that in a sense it was a better attitude, one closer to your own. I really thought that that's what the feminization of medicine meant.
No, it's not necessarily wrong, but these are people who at 5 o'clock want to go home. They want to go home. And the structure of where they're working says at 5 o'clock you go home. My type of medicine, you go home when you're done or you're never done, but that's okay because that's the way my mentors did it. So you have a life, you have a family, you have other interests in addition to what you're doing. When I was trained, my mentors scolded me for the notion that I wanted to take Saturday afternoons off. I mean, it's a whole different game.
Better to be sick now than then. Better to be sick then than now, I really should be asking.
And I think it's better now because I think that the advances in medicine and the general quality of what goes on everywhere has gotten so much better that what was lost in terms of the fact that you always had Dr. So-and-so who was always there for you is in net not bad. The analogy, it also affects our teaching. I think about this because years ago, if it was a cop on the beat, he had 4 blocks that he was in charge of. That was your old doc. He took care of you. And if there was a murder, he investigated the murder. If somebody was hit by a car, he investigated that. Now there's kind of a guy who may have those 4 blocks, but there are people who are better at investigating murders, and there are people who are better at handling an auto accident. And the notion that he should be able to handle everything, that's an old game. That's an old game.
Somehow or other, I have the feeling, and you're not saying it, I have the feeling that you like that old game better. And you're going to say, well, I was brought up that way.
It's the way I practice. I'm not going to change, and my friends aren't going to change. But I can see where the profession, where it's changing. And I'm not going to stand up and say that it's all bad.
What about the concept of medicine as a profession? How does that enter into this discussion?
Oh, I think it's still very much a profession. It's bound by its ethics. It's bound by its code. It's bound by its set of knowledge. You're either in or you're out. It's blurred a little bit. We have a lot of care now or significant care being provided by physician extenders, physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, particularly in the hospital. But the profession still is a terrific, vibrant, healthy profession. I don't think it's in any trouble. No one does.
Not like the law. And the law is. Or do you think that the concept of billable hours started with the law or brought to a high or low point by the legal profession? Has that impacted, in your opinion, upon medicine?
Well, I see I've been watching this for years. I see law very different than my profession because there are people who go to law school with the notion that they're never going to practice law. People don't go to medical school with the notion that they're not going to practice medicine. Some people fall off or choose alternate degrees. Getting a law degree allows one to do a lot of other things. Getting a medical degree doesn't really open, it's either clinical care or research or teaching. Nobody's running a business with a medical degree, or they are, but that's not what the goal was. So it's very different.
When you say, well, they are, because you take back, nobody's running a business. Is that so true?
I don't think I don't think medical school admissions committees get excited admitting a medical student with the idea that someday he's going to be president of Merck & Company. If that happens, fine, but that's not what we're doing. I think that my prejudice, the law schools don't really care what people are going to do professionally down the road.
It's
a different game.
I'll beat up on the lawyers when I have a lawyer sitting here. But let's go back to this question of the medical people. You don't feel as I do that. Look, I know a lot of doctors. You're such an extraordinary exception to this.
I'm not really. Saying, there are a lot of people. I mean, it's.
All right, let me say it.
Okay,
I said it.
Enough.
Let it stand. I'm not asking you to agree, to shake your head, or anything else. But I do know a lot of doctors who keep saying, I tell my children, don't go into this field. And it's largely because they don't have the same attitude toward medicine that you had. They're thinking of it as a money-making proposition.
Yeah, they're very concerned as to whether their kids can make a living.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion separate from the aspect of the professionalism.
Is it?
Yeah, because the professionalism and the discussion of it was something that was very much a part of our training. I had role models who taught me how to talk to patients. I had role models who taught me how to think about congestive heart failure. I had role models, etc. No one ever talked about money. That was never discussed.
How did it come to play such a large role?
Because, as you've discussed here at this table before, third parties realized what a big business it was, and third parties began to pay for it, and so they began to take that paying very seriously and began to change the rules. My wife doesn't like me to tell this story, but if you want to understand what managed care is, it's like my office on the east side across from Lincoln Center. If you want to get to Lincoln Center, there's a lot of ways to get there. Years ago, the way medicine was, everyone who went from my office to Lincoln Center would take a limo. And then one day, the party who realized that they were paying for these trips said, you know what, they can take a cab. It's a lot less. And then one day they said, you know what, they can take the bus. And they still get to Lincoln Center. And so we got into this bus game where people started getting bus level care where they were used to limo level care. It wasn't the person going cross town. It was the person paying for it who decided there might be a different way to do it that would be a lot cheaper.
Now, when I come out of your office, I do take the bus. I haven't gotten different care. I've gotten better care.
No, but I'm talking about just in terms of going cross town. In other words, nothing. I'm just using the analogy of how people go cross town. If you had a third party, though, if you weren't paying for your trip to get cross town, if there was someone who said, you're going to want a limo.
Dr. Cohen, I raised the question then about our resources, our national resources. Can we afford the limos? Is it necessary? Isn't there some real reason for a third party saying, not this, but that, this isn't absolutely necessary, you can do it this way?
Yeah, as long as those third parties are doing that based on science, it's going to be hard to argue.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're saying it's the profit motive for them.
Yeah, but it's also unpleasant. And that's what people are objecting to. You can get cross town by bus, but people, when they're sick, they kind of want limo type approaches, and maybe they even deserve that. People don't want to wait an hour and a half in an emergency room to be seen. People don't want to go to a radiology facility that isn't well lit and clean and such.
You're right. Absolutely, people don't want. Question I'm asking you, and I'm very serious about this, do you think we can afford, as a nation, the kind of care you provide for your patients?
As a nation?
As a nation.
Yeah, I think, I'm not an expert in this, but I think that economically that my patients get away cheaper than most patients who are cared for in my prejudice, way that opposite of what I do. Because I think that my patients have less office visits because I'm available. I think my patients go to the emergency room less. My patients have less duplication. I'll argue with you, have less duplications of unnecessary tests because they're only coming to me. They're not going to this guy and that one, and each one's ordering things again. So the economics of this are not that straightforward in my mind, and I suspect someone else has studied this. But I don't think that my care is more expensive when all the dust is settled than it is for someone going to a clinic and seeing 14 specialists.
Yeah, but as I said to you last time you were here, I've always been amazed that your care is very inexpensive in terms of the bills I see my friends receive. You may be on the East Side, Dr. Cohen, but you don't practice and bill people the way many, many, many of your colleagues do on the East Side. Sorry.
You know, that's a part of the tape from our last conversation that I've seen a couple of times. You know, Dick, I was trained by some very good people, and maybe I've made a terrible mistake. You know, I had an interesting conversation with somebody on Friday. I was talking to a patient who's a successful attorney, and somehow it came up as relates to issues of money and life and what's important in life. And I asked him, I looked at him, in part in anticipation of you perhaps bringing this up again. I said, what do you think I make a year? Well, I looked at this man, you know, I said, what do you think? And he gave an estimate which is twice my income. And I think I make a decent living. I mean, we're being very candid here. And I said, you know, I looked at him, I said, are you serious? I said, do you think an internist in New York, you know, can make that, you know, that kind of money? You know, is it? I mean, I'm not. But if you go into this business with the idea that you're going to be a rich guy, you're going to be very unhappy. I mean, I say that I'm blessed, as I've said to you before. I give the first lecture to the clinical lecture to medical students, and I say to them, look, if any of you are here to make a lot of money, then let me know, because I know people at Goldman Sachs, and each of you is as bright as the people they're recruiting. Will get you a job down there. It's not that kind of business. It's not the kind of thing you go into I don't think you can go into it to be a rich guy. That's not the goal.
All right. In part, that brings me to a question I wanted to ask you about this thing called concierge care. I don't really understand it, maybe because I don't like the idea, but what is it and what's your reaction?
Well, what concierge care is largely, doctors used to take care of people. Then the system evolved where everyone was involved in this managed care or in limited fees by Medicare. And so there were physicians who said, you know what, I don't want to be involved in insurance. I don't want to be involved in taking care of Medicare patients. You give me, you come in once a year and I'm going to charge you a big chunk of money. And in exchange for that, I'm going to tell you that I'm limiting my practice to 400 patients or 300 patients. Here's my telephone number. I'm there for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Okay? Quite frankly, the same thing I provide.
Yeah.
But so for me, it's offensive. But I can understand where a doctor, you see a lot of it in Florida, you see it, it's big in Seattle, where there are these very wealthy people who are coming to the doctor and they want very hand-holding type care, and yet the doctor's hands are tied financially. He can't make a living, can't pay his rent by just taking care of 400 people. So he says to 400 people, guess what? You're in the club. I'm going to take care of you. That's what concierge care is. It's sad. It's sad, and it's national television. It's un-American. It's for rich people to have a different level of care. I mean, that just burns me up. That if you're rich, you have access to the doctor 24 hours a day if you need him, and if you're not rich, then you can't. And also, the notion that a physician, a well-trained physician, is somebody's maidservant, that they should be called 11:30 at Saturday night because that person is out to dinner with someone who doesn't look well, and they want to say, I'm going to call my doctor and ask him. That's not the kind of relationship that I think is appropriate in a doctor-patient relationship. So, you know, you buy a physician butler. You can see I don't have strong feelings about this at all.
Yeah, I know, and I'm interested that that's the end of it that seems to bother you the most. I wanted to ask you something that comes out of something you had said. Well, we began today by talking about your encounter on Friday, someone to whom you had to give very bad news. And I asked about a bad day. I didn't really mean that, but often I've thought, I walk into Dr. Cohen's office, suppose he's not feeling well. What really does happen when, I can't say physician heal thyself because that's not the point. What does happen?
Well, there are clearly days when something is personal going on, or you have a stomach ache, or you've had something bad happen with another patient that's really upset you, or you had a fight with your wife. But, I tell the students, tell people who want to hear, what I call the Johnny Carson story. Johnny Carson was you can't tell it much anymore because they don't know who Johnny Carson was, but you give them the analogy. Johnny Carson, he was on for more than 15 years. Every night he stood up and he was funny. And then I read a biography of Johnny Carson. I found he was divorced many times. And I've seen people who have been in divorces. Now, when you're getting divorced, there's usually 1 or 2 bad days in the course of deciding you're going to get divorced, or when the lawyers start doing their things. And so I suspect Carson had a lot of very unhappy days, but every night he went up and he was funny because he was a professional, okay? And part of being a professional is that you're not allowed to have a bad day. You got to be like Johnny Carson.
And you tell the students that.
Oh, yeah. If you want to take care of patients and you want to provide primary care like I do, you're not allowed to have bad days because it's not fair to the patient. It's not fair to the patient. They're there. But that's no different than the guy who's running the riverboat tour in Disney World. In other words, if you take your grandchildren on the jungle tour at Disney World, and the guy who's running the tour and giving the show, he's not allowed to say, oh, it's going to be a boring tour because I just had a fight with my girlfriend. I mean, that's what we do as socially. That's, those of us who have jobs where we interact with others.
All right, I'm frantically getting a signal, and I've been getting it for a minute, that we have 1 minute left, so I don't know what that means. I want to ask you, 30 seconds. When you come back here 5 years from now, and then 10 years from now, you think there'll be very different questions that we're going to talk about appropriately?
Probably not. Probably not. But it's really exciting to me to think about, in the years that I've been in this business, or this profession, the profound advances that we've seen in terms of the way we treat and diagnose. There are things that I can't even imagine that we're going to be able to do when I come back here in the next time that really make it very, very, very exciting.
Okay, but don't forget, you've got to come back.
I'll be here.
Richard Cohen, thank you for joining me again today. And thanks, too, to you in the audience. I hope you join us again next time. For transcripts of today's program, please send $4 in check or money order to The Open Mind, P.O. Box 7977, FDR Station, New York, New York 10150. Meanwhile, as another old friend used to say, good night and good luck. Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, the Joan Gans Cooney and Peter G. Peterson Fund, the Malkin Fund, the May and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America.